Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of Adrianne Jones. This is one of the most notorious murder cases from the 90s. It's actually one of the very first true crime cases that got me interested in true crime. Fueled by guilt, anger, and passion, this was a murder committed by two very unexpected teenagers. Teenagers who had spent their entire lives planning for their futures. Teens who had literally just won appointments to two of the nation's most prestigious military academies. But they gave it all up in a heat of passion when they murdered the quote-unquote third in their teenage love triangle. This was Adrianne Jones, and these two teens killed her in order to, quote, renew the purity of their relationship. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into all the details about this case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that delivers fresh, never frozen, chef-curated, ready-to-eat meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And for somebody that has a schedule like mine, that is a lifesaver. I have a very busy schedule. Having a full-time job while being a full-time mom is a lot to take on. And that's not even adding into the fact that I'm also trying to live a healthy lifestyle as best as I can. Going to the gym when I can, getting in all of my steps. It feels like there are just not enough hours in a day. And then there is the mental load of planning every single meal you're going to eat every single day. It can be very, very exhausting. But Factor helps set me up for success by helping me cut out the things that I really don't want to be doing, like meal prepping and going to the grocery store and the cleanup that comes with any time you cook. There's so much to clean. Factor cuts all of that out and lets me save that time for things that are more important to me, like spending time with my family or taking care of myself both physically, like going to the gym, or mentally, like having some time to unwind at the end of a very busy day. I just overall just want to be healthy in every aspect of my life. And I have been known from time to time to make food choices that don't align with the goals that I'm trying to maintain. And I do this out of exhaustion and convenience. But truly, having Factor in my fridge is more convenient than even ordering out. Because one, it's literally in my fridge. And two, the food is delicious and actually aligned with the goals I've set out for myself. So that's pretty cool. But do you know what else is pretty cool? They've also added some more of their global cuisines, which that is something that I've always liked about Factor, is the variety that they provide, because variety is the spice of life, as they say. And they've recently added a bunch more, several more different meals for like Asian cooking, Asian dishes, Asian cuisine, and also Mediterranean meals. So if that's something you're into, now you have that information, because that's something that I am definitely into. And that's on top of the fact that they already have a huge weekly menu to choose from in general, right? Like they recently doubled their menu, so now they have 80 different options that are rotating through that you can pick each week. And they're very inclusive in the different types of meals they have. They have, calorie smart, protein plus, keto, or vegan and veggie, which is the one that I favor. It's the only one I get. I'm a vegetarian. But I have heard the meat's good from my husband. He's had it. I have not, but he says it's great. They also have a bunch of other stuff like snacks, smoothies, protein drinks, and even breakfast. I love Factor, and I think you will too. So if all this sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to head to factor75.com or click the link in my description box and enter the code BRATTERSTEIN FB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code BRATTERSTEIN FB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Factor for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Factor that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. Now, with all of that said, let's get into this video. And I just want to preface this with saying that you are not experiencing deja vu. I have, in fact, covered this case before, but I covered this case years ago. It's one of the very first cases I covered on my channel because it was one of the first cases that I became interested in when I was too young to be knowing anything about true crime. Probably it's, up for interpretation. It's up for your opinion, I guess. But it's one that I always wanted to redo because I did it back then. It's short, for one. It's a shorter video. It's also one where I was still doing makeup in my videos. And it's one that is so complex and so layered that I always thought it was worth re-looking into and retelling. And man, I feel like this is probably going to be my longest video, which is insane. It's probably going to take me 2 days to film it. I can already feel it in my bones. But today I am going to tell you that entire story of the murder of Adrianne Jones. I read all the things that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. Okay. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Who do you believe was the driving factor in the murder of Adrianne Jones? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones. Adrianne Jessica Jones, who went by AJ to her friends and her family, was born on June 18th, 1979, and she was born in Mansfield, Texas. Mansfield was a smaller city of less than 20,000 people, and she was the only daughter, the oldest, with 2 little brothers, and she was born to her parents Bill and Linda, and the Joneses lived again in Mansfield. They had lived in the Dallas area initially, but moved to Mansfield for the safety and the security. It seemed like the perfect place for them to raise a family. Adrianne was said to be sensational in every way. She was a really good student. She got good grades. She was always putting her studies and her extracurriculars above everything else. She was even in honors classes. In addition to being just very, very smart, she was also... It seemed that she was driven to just be active, an active person. She did soccer for a while, which she was really good at, but then she got a knee injury and she ended up stopping soccer and then went into cross country, and she killed it at that as well. She was so accomplished that the time that she was killed, she was even waiting for her Letterman jacket to arrive. And in addition to doing all of that, she also held down a part-time job. This was at a place called Golden Fried Chicken, which is or was a fast food spot. I don't know if they still exist. You'll have to let me know if you have one in your area. But the point is, she worked there while also keeping her grades up, and she was said to be a standout employee there as well. Her boss said that she was her superstar, that Adrianne was her superstar, and she was the type of girl who drew a smiley face on her visor of her work uniform. And when she worked the drive-thru, she had the ability to put a huge smile on everyone's face. And that definitely explained that in addition to doing all of these different things in her life and doing them all well, she also had a flourishing social life. She had a lot of friends. She was super popular and super well liked. She was friends with pretty much anyone and everyone she met. She was super silly. She was always trying to make others laugh and herself belly laugh, even if that just meant trying to moonwalk like Michael Jackson, even though, truth be told, she didn't really have any rhythm at all. But she didn't need rhythm to be attractive. Okay, she was the type of girl that was very popular with the boys. I mean, she was very pretty. She was blonde and she was tan and she was 5'3" and she had green eyes. And she was the type of girl that one of her male, I was going to say co-students. That's not correct. What's the word I'm looking for? Peers? One of the dudes at her school said she was not just good looking, but she was good looking. So, she was pretty, she was athletic, and she also had this compelling personality that just drew boys into her. Now, a girl like that wasn't going to stay single, right? She was well coveted, and she seemed to like the attention from boys, right? She had a boyfriend, and this was a guy named Tracy. At the time that she was killed, her and this guy Tracy were dating, and her parents didn't love Tracy, okay? They didn't think he was the best, okay? He was a bodybuilder who Adrianne had met while she was working at Golden Fried Chicken. I guess he went in there to eat. I think they didn't actually clarify on that. I just know they met while she was at work, and he again was a bodybuilder. He was also 19 years old and still in high school, and she was 16, and her parents just thought, he wasn't the best match for her, and he was also too old for her. So Adrianne's parents did try to limit the amount of time that Adrianne and Tracy spent together. They were said to be sort of the overprotective type of parents, but at the same time, this was their only daughter. And she was at an age where she was fiercely independent. She was 16 going on, 30 or whatever. And she was almost an adult and she wanted to do her own thing. And since her parents didn't want her to be around him very much, they were thankful that the two went to 2 separate high schools, so they weren't having unsupervised alone time together during the day at a school where they couldn't monitor it. But when it came to the time that they'd spend together outside of school, her parents made sure to give her a curfew, and she also had to report to her parents of all of her comings and her goings. Which this was a good effort, but Adrianne did still make it a habit of sneaking out of her house to go and see friends and go to see her boyfriend. And her parents did get to a point where they finally made it so her bedroom window was locked. Did they put doors or did they nail it shut? bars. Did they put bars or did they nail it shut? They nailed it shut in an attempt to sort of curb her teenage temptations, which band name called it. Which, listen, I hear that, and coming from a person who was formerly a teenage girl, I have my initial thoughts on that, but I'm also not a parent of a teenage girl, so I'm not coming at this from a position of experience. I don't know if I would nail my daughter's room shut if she was, in addition to being a little strong-willed and sneaking out, if she was so responsible, but they were, and it's their child and their decision to make. And honestly, all they were trying to do was keep her safe, and I can't even imagine the agony that they experienced losing her at such a young age, especially going through all those measures to keep her safe. But back to Adrianne. Adrianne was a sophomore at Mansfield High School, and she planned to attend Texas A&M University and become a behavioral analyst. Now, this was something very new that she wanted to be, because for years prior to this, she had been telling her family she wanted to be a veterinarian. But literally, the night that she was killed, she had been at the gym with her mom, and the two were driving home after the gym, and she asked her mom, like, what is it called to be a person who figures out why a person does the things that they do? Like, why they make the choices they make, etc., etc. And her mom told her that this is a behavioral analyst. So Adrianne told her mom that that's what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to be a behavioral analyst. But she never got to, because her life was literally stolen from her for no reason at all. Which brings us to the Monday morning of December 4th, 1955. It's about 7 a.m. when Adrianne's mom, Linda, is woken up to the sound of Adrianne's alarm clock going off. Now, when her mother first heard this, she didn't go into any sort of panic at the thought that her daughter wasn't there to turn off the alarm. She just figured that her daughter was out on a run, because that's something that Adrianne loved to do. I mean, the cross country of it all, that was kind of her thing. So her going off running in the morning wasn't something that was weird. It was weird that she was still gone at the time that her alarm was going off. Normally, she'd be back by then. Now, as the minutes ticked by and Adrianne still hadn't come home, her mom did start to have the avalanche of thoughts fill her head. She started to wonder if Adrianne wasn't back yet because she had gotten hurt, because remember, she had that knee surgery, and since then she had been having some problems with her knees, which, to be running cross country with knee problems, what a trooper. That's crazy. I can't even imagine, but she did. So her mother started to wonder if maybe she had gotten hurt and she had fallen and she couldn't get home. So with that, she started to pace around the house for a little bit and tried to get her thoughts into a rational place. And with that, she ended up going into Adrianne's bedroom, and she really took in the scene. And this is when she saw that her daughter's bed was made. Like, she hadn't even slept in it the night before, because I guess she wasn't the type of girl to make her bed first thing in the morning. So that was strange. But the thing that was the most strange is that Adrianne's running shoes were still in her room. In finding the scene, Linda and her son immediately get in the car and they drive over to Adrianne's school to see if she's there. They didn't think that she was there. I mean, Adrianne didn't take her school books and she wouldn't typically go in that early, but she didn't really know what else to do. So she got there, she looked around, and she found that Adrianne wasn't there. So immediately they drive back to the house and they go into Adrianne's address book because of the 90s of it all. And they start calling all of her friends from her address book, but no one has seen or heard from her. Now, as time went by and Adrianne didn't come back, and the fact that it was Monday and Adrianne had school and she didn't come back in time to actually go to school on time, Adrianne's mother called Adrianne's father, Bill, and told him what was going on so that he could come home, and they reported their daughter missing. Now, when the police came and they started looking into the case, they didn't really have a lot to go on, and Linda's family didn't have a lot to tell police about what may have happened to her. Linda did sit there and try to rack her brain, but the only thing that she could come up with was a phone call that Adrianne had gotten the night before. And the phone call in itself wasn't strange, but it was just the time at which the conversation happened. So it was Sunday night, and at 10:30 p.m., the phone rang. Now, it was not normal for Adrianne to get calls this late, and it definitely wasn't normal for her parents to allow her to take a call that late. But the person who called in was her boyfriend, Tracy, and Tracy had recently been away. They hadn't seen and talked to each other, so her mom decided, okay, what the hell, go ahead and talk to your boyfriend. So Adrianne's there talking to her boyfriend, and her mother is nearby doing mom stuff, but she's close enough that she can hear Adrianne on this phone call. And in the middle of the phone call, she hears what sounds like Adrianne clicking over to take another call that came in. So Adrianne takes this other call that came in, talks to her about a minute, clicks back over to Tracy, finishes that call, then hangs up the phone. Once Adrianne was off the phone, Linda asked her, like, oh, did somebody else call in? Because it sounded like you clicked over and talked to somebody else. And Adrianne said yes. She said that David from cross country had called her phone and seemed very upset. And she was the type of person who had a tender heart, always wanted to help, but also wanted to understand human behavior and wanted to understand why people acted the way they did. So naturally, when somebody calls upset, she's going to want to have that conversation. Now, after getting off this call, Linda could tell that Adrianne was sort of in her thoughts, but they didn't discuss the call any further, and within no time said their goodnights and went to bed. Or rather, Linda went to bed and thought Adrianne went to bed, but she never really did, and now she was just gone. So, her mother's panicking. She's calling everyone she can think of. She even called Adrianne's cross-country coach to see if she could figure out who this David person was that like called and beeped into the phone call Adrianne was having with her boyfriend. But when her mother asked if there was anybody by that name on cross-country, her coach was like, yeah, we have like one David, but he and Adrianne don't really know each other. I've never seen them socialize with each other. And this was confirmed the next day when the coach actually talked to this David and was like, hey, did you call Adrianne last night? Like when, did you call Adrianne the night she went missing? And he seemed super confused. He was like, no, like I don't know that girl. His phone number wasn't even in her address book. So at that point, they were thinking that maybe Adrianne had actually made up the name David to hide who she was really talking to. And the problem with this is Adrianne wasn't here to answer any questions, so nobody knew who this David person was. All they knew is the night before she went missing, she talked to Tracy and maybe talked to somebody whose name was maybe David. Now, they did look into Tracy since he was one of the last people to speak to her, and there are a lot of reasons to look into Tracy, right? Boyfriend, older, last person she talked to, a lot of things pointed to him. But when they spoke to him, they ended up pretty quickly excluding him as like a suspect in the case. They gave him a polygraph test, all that jazz, and he came up clean. So that was unfortunately a bust for police, which was unfortunate because they really needed to get some sort of lead to figure out where she was, because as more and more time went by, it seemed more and more likely that something terrible had happened. And it turned out they were right. The day that Adrianne was reported missing, a local farmer who lived in Grand Prairie, which was a town about 10 miles from Mansfield, left his home, and he was headed to work, passing by a barbed wire fence near Joe Pool Lake that closed in his property and made it so that his cattle wouldn't get away. Now, when he got to the edge of his fence, he found that the gate was actually open, and that was weird for him because, again, he kept it closed to keep his animals inside the gate. But initially, he just kind of shook his head, thought maybe he was a little bit forgetful, but that quickly changed when next to his fence, he noticed what looked like a body lying on the ground. He said at first he was really confused and not sure what he was looking at. He tried to kind of convince himself that it was roadkill, but as he looked more closely, he could see the beaten looking face of a girl. And so he freaked out. He sat in his car. He locked his doors. He thought that maybe this was some sort of trap and that the girl was being used as like bait to lure him out of his car. But as he sat there and looked around, he didn't see anybody else, just this girl lying in the ground, and ground that was covered in blood. There was so much blood that later investigators took like shovels full of bloody dirt for, investigative purposes. So he sat there watching her, willing her to move, but she never did. So eventually he got out of his car and he slowly approached her and found that she was definitely too far gone. So with that, he got back in his car. He drove back home. He dialed 911. And then after getting off the phone with 911, he actually called a cousin of his who was a police officer in Dallas. And this cousin lived just down the road from him. And he asked this cousin to come and be with him in that moment, because I can only imagine how horrifying it would be to stumble upon a scene like this and on your property. When police got there, they found that this girl was just lying on her back, and she was actually lying on her back, clutching the grass in an unnatural position. She was dressed in a long sleeve shirt over a t-shirt, and this t-shirt actually did help in identifying her because it was Adrianne's cross-country regional shirt. She was also wearing these flannel pajama shorts, but she was barefoot, and all she was wearing was a single ankle bracelet. Now, this is a little bit graphic, but this should be the extent of it. But she was also clearly beaten. Her head was, quote, caved in like a pumpkin on one side, and she had been shot twice in the head. One was in the forehead, and one was in her cheek. And the 2 shells from these shots were found near her body. One of the police officers who worked this case said of Adrianne's murder, and I quote, "It takes a cold-blooded person to shoot a pretty young girl in the face from 2 to 4 feet away. It was confirmed by looking at her body that she was killed at about 1 a.m. the night before she was found, and thankfully, there was no sign of sexual assault, which is something to hold on to, because often you find like a young woman dead by herself, and that, I don't know about you, that is the first thing I think of. So the body found by the fence, which was Adrianne's body, but they didn't know that at the point that she was found, right? She's found at sunrise, and her mother reports her missing a few hours later, but it would take several more hours before they connected the dots that this missing girl was also the girl that was found by the fence. It wasn't until hours later that investigators working the body found by the fence received a call from Mansfield police letting them know that they had a 16-year-old girl who was missing, who was a match to the Jane Doe that they had found dead by the fence. During this call, they were able to learn that the Mansfield police, who were the ones handling Adrianne's missing persons report, had the information that Adrianne had a scar on her left knee, and this was from her knee surgery. They were also able to tell the other police people from Grand Prairie that the girl that was missing would have been wearing athletic clothes. So they take the scar on the knee and they take the clothing that she would likely have been wearing, and quickly they were able to figure out that Adrianne and the girl found by the fence were one and the same. And then they had to inform her parents, and her dad had to identify her body. I can't even imagine being in his position. I can't imagine being in the position where you find out your kid is dead, and then you have to see them in that condition, and then you have to go and tell people and make the phone calls to other people who know and love her and tell them that she's gone, and have them be in disbelief and be like, no, like it can't be, but you know that it is, because you literally had to see her that way. And you have no idea who did this to her or why. Now, once the word of Adrianne's murder got out there, people were in shock. People were heartbroken. They couldn't understand how this young girl, 16 years old, with all of this promise, I mean, look at all that she had accomplished with her athletics and the honors grades, and like she was so incredibly smart. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she was murdered so brutally and seemingly for no reason. This seemed to be incredibly random and incredibly motiveless. The school that Adrianne attended brought in counselors to try to help any kid that was having trouble accepting what had happened and having trouble accepting that they weren't as invincible as they had been disillusioned to believe. Students got together and organized for a red oak tree to be planted in Adrianne's honor next to the running track where she used to practice, with a bronze plaque standing in front that read, quote, "Unity, strength, courage." And Adrianne's mother said of this inscription, and I quote, "Unity, there is unity of numbers. Strength, we draw strength from that unity. That gives us courage to face the evils in this world." There was also a handmade cross that was left at the area where Adrianne's body was recovered, the place she was brutally murdered, and a place she had no business being. Her mother even said of this quote, I mean, here she is, this beautiful young girl, and she's found in this really wacky place out in nowhere land, and she's been shot in the face and bludgeoned in the back of her head, and you don't know why. What did this young 16-year-old little girl know or do that caused you to hate her that much? And that was a question, right? Like, what could this girl have done to somebody to make them hate her that much? And who did it? This is what the police had to try to figure out. In order to try to piece together what happened to her, they needed to look into her final hours, and they looked into her bedroom specifically because she had been in the house with her mom and had gone to her room that night with her mother thinking she was going to bed. But when police went into the house and they looked into her room, there wasn't any sign that she had been like forcefully taken from her room. Nothing was, knocked over. There was nothing in disarray. So they figured that she left of her own free will, but they also were able to tell that it didn't seem like she expected to be gone very long because she literally left barefoot. And these two things made people believe, and the police believed specifically, that whoever did this was somebody that Adrianne knew, somebody that she trusted enough to just run outside with barefoot. Now, that definitely narrowed it down some, right? Because now it's not any person that ever lived in the world that could be responsible for this. Now it's just every person that Adrianne knew, which was still a lot because she was a popular 16-year-old girl and had a lot of friends. So the only other thing that police had that could sort of narrow it down at all is the fact that Adrianne's brother said that he thought he saw a pickup truck on their street the night that Adrianne went missing. So now they're like, okay, it's anyone in the world who owns a pickup truck, and more specifically, anyone that Adrianne knew that may own a pickup truck, because they don't even know for sure that this pickup truck is related to her disappearance and murder. They questioned all her friends. They got alibis. They even gave some people polygraph tests, but they were getting nowhere. Her parents were having such a hard time, as I'm sure you can imagine. They were getting so desperate at the lack of movement in the case that they even went to a psychic. They were doing everything in their power to get any sort of information that could help them at all, but nothing was helping. Now, that's not to say that police had zero suspects, because that's not true. Police did have one particular girl that they looked into, and I will say that the lore around this girl is sketchy at best. When looking into her and reading all of the stories about her, it really felt like I was learning about her through a bad game of telephone. But from what I have gathered, okay, so this is all grain of salt, okay? This girl had a boyfriend. This boyfriend may or may not have hooked up with one of Adrianne's friends. The girl found out about this, attacked this girl, Adrianne's friend, with a bat, breaking her cheekbone and giving her a concussion, and then shot her boyfriend with a gun. Which sounds to me like 2 counts of attempted murder, but apparently not. Instead, this girl got just 2 years probation. But I mean, it did go to court, because what this girl did was hella illegal. And you may be asking yourself, like, how does Adrianne fit into this situation? Well, I will tell you. She either testified against this girl at trial or told school officials what happened. Both reportings of what happened are out there. But either way, she was involved in some capacity, so police were thinking that perhaps this girl, who had threatened to kill Adrianne for some reason in the past, may have been responsible for her murder now. But here's the thing. They looked into this girl and she had a solid alibi. She couldn't have been the person who did this to Adrianne, and she took a polygraph test and she passed. So that seemed like a bust. It seemed like they were getting really nowhere. But she wasn't the only person they were looking into, because remember, we also have this elusive David character. And I have some information about that. So you remember how I told you that they questioned Tracy, Adrianne's boyfriend, right? And they figured out that he didn't do it, so it was a total bust. Well, even though he didn't do it himself, that didn't mean he didn't have some interesting information he was able to give to police, because he was able to tell them who he believed this David person was. Tracy told police that Adrianne essentially kind of had, for lack of a better word, a stalker. It was a guy who was very into her, figured out where she worked, figured out her phone number, followed her around, was just always there, even though she had made it clear to him that she was not interested. Now here's the thing. This guy's name wasn't David, it was Brian. Now this mattered to police particularly because when talking to Tracy, Tracy remembered how during their last phone call that they had had the night that she was killed, she had been talking to him and she had beeped over to take another call and had come back. But when he asked her who was that on the other line, she didn't say David from track. She didn't say David from cross country. I forget the difference between cross country and track. It wasn't David from the running sport, okay? It was Brian, and Brian seemed upset. So now police are thinking, oh, this was never a person named David at all. This was a person named Brian, and we need to look into this guy because reportedly he's also obsessed with her. So they track Brian down, they talk to him, and guess what? He lies. He tells the police that he didn't even know who Adrianne was, had never met her. That was a name he had never heard before in his life, but obviously that wasn't true. Police knew that that wasn't true, and within time they were able to wear him down enough to admit that not only did he know her, but the two were friends. Now, would Adrianne have described the two as friends? I really can't say, but he thought they were friends. Now, when they asked what he was doing the night that Adrianne was murdered, he said that he was drunk. He said that he hadn't drank alcohol in months, but he was having a night where he was particularly down because he was bummed out that he was single. So he had gotten himself drunk and really couldn't remember much of the night. He said he couldn't remember if he had talked to Adrianne. He may have talked to her. He didn't even remember. He even admitted that it was possible that he went to her house and couldn't even remember. So with that, he was actually arrested on December 15th, 1995. And at the time that this guy was arrested, everybody who knew him was in total shock. No one could believe that he could be responsible for what happened to Adrianne. He wasn't a violent guy. It just wasn't in his nature. On top of that, his father even gave him an alibi, saying that yes, he was drunk, yes, he had been drinking, but he was doing it at home and he never left the house. But despite this, he was arrested and he was in jail. And while in jail, he was given a polygraph test. And after he took this polygraph test, the polygrapher, the person who runs it, told the cops oh, I don't know what to tell you, but this kid passed with flying colors. Hello? This kid passed with flying colors. And with that, the cops are like, fuck, did we make a mistake here? And after 3 weeks of this guy, Brian, being arrested and being held in connection with Adrianne's murder, they realized that they really had nothing to hold him on it. No evidence that actually linked him to the crime and nothing to build a strong enough case to convict him of murder. So they had to let him go. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, Brian and his parents sued big time, obviously. But that's not something we're going to talk about. Don't get me wrong, that sucks. Being arrested for something you didn't do and held in jail for 3 weeks, insanity. But that's not what we're talking about. Right now, we're talking about Adrianne. And after Brian was arrested and released, the case went cold. All of the leads dried up and they weren't going to get any more forward momentum on her case for 9 months, dude. 9 months of her poor family just like sitting there heartbroken, waiting for answers. 9 months of her mother wearing a piece of clothing, shoes, or makeup of Adrianne's just to feel close to her daughter. And 9 months of her father leaving the lights on in Adrianne's bedroom like he was hoping that she'd come home to him. 9 months of waiting with no answers. And when the answers finally would come, it would bring an absolute circus of news media and reporters to the small area of Mansfield, all because the two people who it turned out were responsible for what happened here were two of the most unlikely suspects anyone could have imagined. So here's what happened. In August of 1996, 9 months after Adrianne was murdered, 2 cadets from the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, they came forward to their supervisors and told them that their roommate had confessed to them that she had committed a murder. The 2 girls said they didn't want to believe it was true and they had trouble believing it was the case because they're like, who could do something like this? But the girl who had confessed to them was so serious and seemingly so detailed in her recounting, so they thought that they better bring it up to somebody in case something did happen, because it would have been better to have said something and it had been nothing than to not say something and find out that it was something. And in this case in particular, apparently even if they didn't think it was anything, if they heard something like this, they had to confess it to their superiors because the Navy has an honor code, and this is called the midshipman honor concept, which, quote, requires midshipmen to report wrongdoing by fellow officers. Failure to adhere to the honor code could lead to an officer's dismissal, end quote. So they were required to tell what they heard, even if they didn't believe that it was true, or they were basically sacrificing or in threat of sacrificing everything they'd been working towards. It's just so crazy, dude. Because just imagine this, okay? This young girl sitting there with 2 of her cadet roommates telling them something that she thinks they're bonding, and she's telling them this insane secret to try to relate, question mark? Like, I don't know who she thinks is like her. I guess when people are like this, they assume that more people are like this because they don't think that they're damaged goods. But she's there trying to bond with her cadet roommates when really she's giving the police exactly what they need to finally solve this cold case. Anyways, once these cadets report this to their superiors are like, okay, if this girl actually did what she's telling her roommates she did, she would have done this back in her hometown, not here. She would have done this back in her hometown of Texas. So they reach out to local authorities in this girl's hometown to see if there were any unsolved murder cases that would fit, like the situation, the timeline of when this girl was still there. And the local police say yes. They say that it's very likely that the murdered girl that their cadet's talking about or is confessing to murdering was that of Adrianne Jones. So the officers who were handling the cold case were like, well, who the fuck is this girl who's confessing to Adrianne's murder? And they learned that this is a girl named Diane Zamora, the girlfriend of David Graham. It's all coming full circle. This is the cross-country guy. This is the guy. So now let's briefly talk about who David and Diane were individually, who they were as a couple, and how they relate to Adrianne. Because remember, nobody thought that David and Adrianne even knew each other. Even when he was questioned by the coach, he's like, well, no, I don't even know that girl. But apparently, maybe he did. So at the time that the murder took place, David would have been 18 years old. He was a senior and he was described as the perfect guy, to which I disagree, but he was said to have been the perfect gentleman, the type of guy who had a, quote, very businesslike demeanor, always saying, yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, and helping his grandmother cross the street and saying, bless you when a stranger has to sneeze. One of his school peers even said of him, quote, you know how growing up your mom tells you about the perfect guy, the perfect gentleman, and there's nobody out there like that? David was. He was one of the last cool guys on earth. David was the baby of his family, and he excelled academically, taking after both of his parents that were both teachers and very intelligent people. He, as other peers said, that he was the type of kid who could ace French class while sleeping through the entire class and taking no notes. He just had a knack for understanding and learning. Like, comprehension seemed strong with this one. He was also very involved in extracurriculars. Again, he was on the Mansfield High School track team, just like Adrian. And he was also a battalion commander in the junior ROTC. The military was incredibly important to David, so ROTC was just like a no-brainer for him. He wanted to be a fighter pilot. This is something that he decided he wanted to be when he was a kid. That dream never went away, and he was taking all the steps in order to make that a reality. Like, when he graduated, he already had the plans that he was going to go to the Air Force Academy, which was in Colorado Springs, as soon as he graduated. Which is actually where he was at the time that his girlfriend, Diane, was being questioned and her connection to a murder that she had confessed to her friends. So, Diane. Diane was actually the oldest, where David was the baby in his family. Diane was the oldest, and she was born into a pretty large religious family. Like, her grandfather, I believe, was a minister, so that religious. The family did struggle financially, and Diane was sort of responsible, not just for being an older sibling, but also for kind of being the caretaker of her younger siblings because her family had to work so much to try to make ends meet. And I think this is kind of common, but her role was definitely amped up a few notches because, again, her mom and dad worked tirelessly multiple jobs to try to keep their family afloat. Diane's mother said that she would describe her daughter as really quiet, but the type of girl who was incredibly determined. She was the type of person who knew what she wanted and did everything that she needed to do to make sure she achieved her goals. She was also said to be incredibly smart, just like Adrian, just like David. She wanted to work at NASA. Specifically, she wanted to work as an astronaut, which dream big. I mean, dream the literal biggest, right? An astronaut. And this had been her dream her whole life, basically since she was in the 3rd grade. Her plan was military school and then becoming a mission specialist for NASA, and she took steps to make sure she was moving towards that goal. She studied constantly. She would even wake up super early to do so before school if she had to. She took honors classes like Adrian. She was in several extracurriculars. She played in the marching band and she ran cross country, and she was also a member of the student council. So, she was like Adrian in a lot of ways, but also very different than her in a lot of ways. Like, she wasn't a social butterfly like Adrian at all. She kept her circle small. She wasn't super interested in boys, whereas Adrian was said to have boys flocking to her, and she was like a little bit of a flirt and a social butterfly. That was except for David. The two met when she was just 14 years old at a Civil Air Patrol meeting, and after they met, they were interested in each other enough to stay in contact with one another, and finally took their friendship to the next level. This was 3 years after they met when they started dating in 1995. They started dating in 1995, the year that Adrian was killed. So David and Diane together, and there are very serious differing accounts on what the dynamic was in their relationship depending on what side you fall on and who you think was more of the aggressor in the situation. But one thing we can say for certain is from the moment they were together, their relationship was incredibly serious. Like, there was nothing casual about these two dating, and in hindsight, David has said that he realized even at the time that the relationship that they were in was far more serious than it should have been for their positions in life. But he said of the two of them, quote, I was infatuated with her and she was obsessed with me. And this did seem to be true. I mean, even members of Diane's family noticed this. Even an aunt of Diane's was so concerned over the dynamic between the two of them that she went to Diane's mom and brought it up to her. And her mom just said that this was like a teenage love. But her aunt said that Diane just seemed to be obsessed with David and thought that their love was pure and otherworldly and like nothing you've ever seen before. And she thought that they just did not have an ordinary love. This was no ordinary love. No ordinary love. And apparently it got to the point that Diane was like snooty to David's friends. She got mad at anybody who seemed like they were coming between them, even if they weren't really. They were just like in his orbit and she didn't appreciate it. She like had him, she controlled him for one. People said that she did control him, and she had him quit jobs that he had because it seemed like they were taking too much attention and time away from her. And her own aunt said of her feelings for David, quote, she thought he hung the moon. Which I've never heard that saying before. And if it wasn't about them, I would be like, that's so cute. You know what? You know who hangs the moon? My toddler hangs the moon. But anyways, here's the thing. In hearing that, you may think, oh, it sounds like Diana controlled David, so whatever happened here may be Diana's fault. But then, on the flip side, when you hear people talk about David, it sounded like he was pretty similar. They say that he controlled Diane, that he, made her sign up for track, even though she didn't like running. And even at her graduation, he never took his arm off of her. Like his arm was around her and he wouldn't take it off, despite several of her family members wanting to give her a hug. He was just like, hug us. Hug both of us because we are one. I want to climb inside your skin and live there. They said that he drove her everywhere, whether it be to school, to work, to track meets. He was always with her. The two were always together. They even spent the night at each other's homes. And at one point, she got in, I think, an accident, maybe even driving his vehicle, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that, though, but she hurt her hand is the point. And she had to stay in the hospital when it happened. And David was there with her, staying with her all day and all night, even missing school so he could be with her while she was in the hospital. But despite all those things, okay, because those are things that we know now in hindsight, which is 2020. With all of that aside, when you put these two on paper, they seemed like the perfect match. They were both career-focused overachievers with high ambitions who wanted what they wanted, and what they wanted in that moment was each other. So after just a month of dating, the two got engaged. And not just like, oh, we're casually engaged. Like, no, we are engaged and we have a wedding date picked out. They were literally planning to get married right after the two of them graduated from their respective military academies in the year 2000. The two were also saving themselves for marriage. Okay, we're going to talk about sex, baby. They were saving themselves for marriage. Okay, Diane, her virginity, very important to her. Again, she came from a very religious family. And from what I've heard and learned, to some people who are religious, virginity is a big deal, just like the Jonas brothers with their purity rings. And this was very important to Diane, not just that she saved herself for marriage, but that her husband has done the same. She wanted to be with somebody who had never been with anybody else so that they could experience that only with one another. But she only wanted to do so after the two were married. But here's the thing. Teenagers are going to teenage, and the two were already banging. The temptation was too much. And they were like, listen, we're going to justify this by saying that the engagement is close enough, and we will definitely still make sure that we get married and we're only with each other. But first, they were going to have to see if their love could withstand time and distance, because they were being literally pulled in two separate directions. She was being sent to the Naval Academy, which was in Annapolis, Maryland. Okay, which is where she was going to end up confessing to the murder and have all of this start where we're talking today. And he was being sent to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. But you know what's so wild here is that in order for them to get into these prestigious positions that they were in, which is, going to these respective military schools, they had to get congressional recommendations. And they both did. And get this, David was actually suggested that he go to a school called West Point, I think. What the school isn't super relevant, but I believe it was an Army academy, so he didn't go there because he wanted to be in the Air Force. But guess who recommended him? Al Gore. The Al Gore recommended that he go to this Army school. And though he did not go there, that doesn't matter. It just shows the fact that Al Gore is the one who recommended him, shows what an impressive kid he was. But anyways, the point is that both of them received recommendations to get these positions. Okay, they were both considered to be very impressive kids with bright futures. And that's why the fact that they were connected with the murder of a 16-year-old girl was just so incredibly insane. And Adrianne's parents even said, like, if these two kids weren't who they were, the media circus that came with this case wouldn't have been what it was, which matters because it seemed like they were focusing much more on who these two kids were as opposed to who Adrianne was, which we see time and time again, which is why I'm giving you a very Cliff Notes version of who they were. I think you need to know because I think it's relevant, but I'm much more focused on who Adrianne was, and I want that to be the takeaway, personally. So, at the time that the confession was made to the police, Diane was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, and David was a cadet in U.S. Basic Air Force cadet training in the Air Force Academy. Both of them were literally living their actual dreams that they'd both been planning their whole lives around. And then for Diane, she literally, out of nowhere, confessed to murdering a girl to her 2 cadet roommates. So anyways, back to Diane. She's there. She's sitting with her girlfriends, and she's confessing to them that she and her boyfriend killed a teenage girl. And according to them, she seems proud. She seems proud that her boyfriend, David, would kill for her and kill for their love. And she seems proud that she's able to get him to do whatever she wants, basically. They said that she told them that the murder needed to happen and that she didn't feel bad about it because of that, except when she and David had gone to Adrianne's funeral, they did that. And she said she felt bad when she saw Adrianne's parents crying, which is just like, if you kill me, don't go to my fucking funeral. Don't. Anyway, she tells them this, and then they have a, quote, troubled night deciding whether or not they're going to tell their superiors, because, again, they're going back and forth on whether or not they believe it and if they should, ruffle any feathers over something that may not be true. But, bro, just imagine if they didn't. Imagine if they didn't go forward to police, because this is what ended up getting them caught. And if they hadn't gone to the police, David and Diane could have graduated, gotten married, and be an astronaut and a pilot right now. It's insane. And what's really wild here is it turns out that these 2 girls aren't the only ones that she told, because after all this came out, a first-year midshipman actually resigned after he came forward and admitted that it actually told him what happened prior to telling her roommates. And he resigned because this was a violation of the Academy's honor code. Now, why would he do this? Why would he keep Diane's secret? Well, according to him, he was blindly love-struck by Diane and had chosen to leave the Academy voluntarily rather than to face dismissal hearings, I guess. There was some sort of flirtation between her and this guy. His name was Jay, by the way, and it was making David uncomfortable, apparently. Like, there was something there. And this guy knew that he fucked up by not saying anything, and he even said of this quote, "Anyone besides me would have turned her in, and I should have too." And he knew this because when Diane confessed the murder to him, he literally told her that Adrianne deserved to die because she took something that she knew belonged to someone else. No remorse, just justifications in her mind. So anyways, once the detectives working Adrianne's case heard about Diane's confession, because remember, we went on a little side trail, we rabbit trailed, we're back. Detectives, they learn about Diane's confession, and immediately they're on a plane. They're heading out there. They want to question her, and they want to question her hard. And as soon as they're sitting down with her and they inform her who they are and why they're there, she gives them what they call the, quote, 1,000-mile stare, where it's like she's just looking right through at the two detectives that are sitting right in front of her. Now, once she finally talked, she denied everything. She said that she didn't kill Adrianne. David didn't kill Adrianne. She made the whole thing up because she wanted to seem cool. Because nothing is cooler than murdering a 16-year-old girl. Now, police, they didn't believe Diane at all, and they immediately started investigating both Diane and David. And in the meantime, they also made sure that she took a leave of absence from the Naval Academy, which was devastating to her, obviously. But wait, is that the consequences of one's actions? Crazy how that happens, because even if she didn't kill Adrianne, which was TBD at the time, you don't go around telling people you did just because you think it'll make you sound cool. Just for anyone out there who does stupid shit like that. Because people do. People do. So, since she was kicked out of the Naval Academy temporarily, she was sent home to fly home to Texas. But from there, she actually flew to Colorado to go see her long-distance beau. And once they were together, she told him what happened. She told him that she had confessed to 2 cadets that she and he had killed Adrianne, and that she gave a lot of differing accounts to different people about what happened, and that when police came to question her, because of course they're going to come and question her, she told them that she had made the whole thing up and that they didn't actually do it. Now, after talking to Diane, David knew that it was only a matter of time before police showed up to question him as well, so he knew that all he had to do was say the same thing Diane did, say that he doesn't know why she's saying that he definitely had nothing to do with it, and they sat there and strategized how they were going to get away with murder. So when police came and questioned David, he told them the exact same thing. He didn't know why Diane would say something like that because he had nothing to do with the murder of Adrianne, and police didn't believe him. They didn't believe him, and they wanted to give him a polygraph test, which he had to do because the Air Force Academy, like, it was the rules. You had to take it. You had to cooperate with police. And he failed. So they continued to question him from there, and they questioned him for 2 days without an attorney present, which was a mistake on his part for sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad he made the mistake, but it was a mistake nonetheless. During this questioning, the police told him, like, we know you did it. If you don't confess to doing it, you're going to get the death penalty. But if you sit down here and you write a written confession, we will do what we can to help you. And the members of the Air Force Academy that were there, because, like, you know, he's at the school and they tell him, like, listen, you need to sit down and you need to tell the truth. Like, this is what you have to do. And so he agrees to confess. He literally sat there and wrote a 4.5-page confession telling them everything that happened and why. David said it all started in November of 1995 when his and Adrianne's cross-country team went to regionals, which was going to be about 5 hours away, so quite a drive. So she and her team all piled inside of a van and made the trip to regionals, which was basically halfway across the state. They went, they competed, they did well, everything was chill, and then they made the several hours long trip back. And once they got back to the school, all of the teammates, Adrianne and her teammates, all got out and went home getting rides from various people home. And reportedly, Adrianne got a ride home from a friend. This friend was David Graham, and this is the same David Graham who reportedly Adrianne had cozied up to quite a bit on the drive home from regionals that night. According to David, on the way home, he and Adrianne pulled off into an elementary school parking lot where they were intimate with one another, slept with one another. How they call it sleeping, I really can't say. But this is what he said happened. And he said that it was a situation, an encounter that was short-lived and unappreciated. Hardly appreciated, rather. And he said specifically of this quote, "The event was meaningless and painful. Painful, that is, because I was letting down the one person I had swore to be faithful to." He said immediately after his indiscretion, he felt terrible, and within no time, he couldn't hold it in any longer. And he went and told his very serious girlfriend what he did that night. And he said of this quote, "I could never hold anything from Diane, nor she from me. She knew in my eyes that something was wrong the moment I decided to confess." He said he felt like he had to tell her because both he and Diane knew that their love for each other was pure and perfect. There was nothing that could break them apart, and nothing that could come between the two of them. Then he added, quote, "No one, that is, except that one girl that had stolen from us our purity." To which I say, like, homeboy, weren't you there too? So anyways, a month after the sex between him and Adrianne, he went and told Diane what happened. And she was incredibly upset for a variety of reasons. 1, he cheated on her. 2, her virginity and being with her virginity was important to her, and she had given that up to be with him. But it was incredibly important for her that both her and her partner were only with each other. And now that was out the window. And 3, she knew that her father had been unfaithful to her mother, like her father had cheated on her mother. So this particular act of betrayal was incredibly triggering for her. He said that when he told her, she just started screaming hysterically. She was trying to, like, beat him with a brass rod. She was throwing herself around the room. She was slamming her head into the walls and into the floor and just screaming. She was out of her mind in grief and in anger. And later in her confession to police, she said of this in part, quote, "I kept ramming my head against the walls, and when I was on the ground, I kept ramming my head into the floor, trying to crack my skull. I just didn't want to live with what he had said to me." She added in part, quote, "I screamed at him, 'Kill her, kill her.' He was just so scared that he wasn't about to say no to me. I was still banging my head against the floor. All David wanted to do was make everything better." He said that after telling Diane what happened in the throes of her breakdown, she started saying over and over that Adrianne needed to die. He said that in her mind, it seemed like the only way for them to purify their relationship and to be in good standing was for Adrianne to no longer walk this earth. And it wasn't just that. She also didn't want people to learn what had happened and to start talking about her, talking about David, and judging their relationship if they stayed together. So she wanted Adrianne dead, and David agreed. He literally said that the only way he could satisfy Diane's womanly vengeance was with, quote, "the one who had for an instant taken her place." He said he would have done anything she wanted. And he said of this specifically, and I quote, "Diane's beautiful eyes have always played the strings of my heart effortlessly. I can't imagine life without her. Not for a second did I want to lose her. I didn't have any harsh feelings for Adrianne, but no one could stand between me and Diane. He said because of this, that night in December, he called Adrianne. He called Adrianne and asked if she wouldn't be willing to meet him. And she agreed. He suggested that he would pick her up at about 12:30, and she said that that would be fine. And the initial plan was that he was going to drive her away from the house, he was going to break her neck, and then he was going to sink her body to the bottom of a lake, all while Diane hid in the back of the car to be there as, I don't know, moral support. He even brought the weights with him to hold her body down at the bottom of the lake. So he went that night and he picked up Adrianne. He got there a little closer to 1:30 because he was running late, but he got there, he picked her up, and while Diane hid in the back seat, like not in the back seat, but in like the trunk area, they drove to an open field. Diane said that while this was happening, she wanted to tell him to forget about it, to just turn back. And she didn't learn until later that David had felt the same way. He was no longer wanting to go through with this. But both of them were too afraid to tell the other that they had changed their minds. Now, according to them, once they got to this location, Adrianne sort of leaned her seat back. And once she did this, David motioned to Diane that now is the time for her to come out. And according to Diane later, when she saw Adrianne in the seat in that reclined position, it made her all the more vengeful and rageful in that moment, because thinking about what was happening between the two of them was one thing, but to actually see her in that position made all the images of what she thought the two did together run through her head. So, because David motioned for Diane to come, she climbed out of there was like a hatch that went to the trunk area. So she pushes that down. She climbs out and Adrianne sees her and she panics for a little bit. You know, she freaks out because this is not what she was expecting. She's been ambushed. And in that moment, Diane told her that her and David just wanted to talk to Adrianne. And then she started to ask her questions and she asked her about the two sleeping together. And Diane said that Adrianne responded with saying that like she didn't feel good about it. She was just wrapped with, regret and guilt, basically. And for whatever reason, this response just made Diane more angry. So she started freaking out. She started screaming at Adrianne and she started screaming for David to just do it. It was at this point that David attacked Adrianne. They both did. He grabbed her, he put his arm around her neck, he tried to break her neck and quickly realized that it was a lot harder to do than it looked in the movies. And so they were losing control of the situation. And Diane, thinking that Adrianne was going to be able to hurt David while she's fighting him off, took one of the weights that they were intending to use to weigh her down to the bottom of the lake and hit her in the head with one of the weights. And once they hit her, they both felt like they just had to go through with it. They had to continue because at this point they felt like it would be more scary to stop than to just kill her, which is like you can always stop and not kill someone. During this time, Adrianne was able to get out of the car and she started running down the road with them following behind her. And she made it as far as this barbed wire fence. This is the fence that her body was later found by, and she just collapsed. So David got out of the car and he went up to her and he checked her and he came back to the car and told Diane that Adrianne was dead. And Diane said, like, are you sure? Because if you're not sure, you need to go and you need to shoot her. He says that he was panicking and he didn't want to do it, but in Diane's own words, she told him to go do it. So he did. He walked over and he shot this girl twice in the head, knowing that he could not leave the key witness to their crimes alive. He said when he got back in the car, he and Diane said their I love yous to each other, hugged each other, and after a minute of silence, Diane looked to him and said, quote, "We shouldn't have done that, David." And that was the story. Early the morning after David gave his confession, police went and arrested Diane at her grandparents' house. And when she was arrested, she didn't seem surprised or scared to be in handcuffs. She just seemed to accept what was happening to her. And once she was arrested, she was made privy to David's confession. She was She was read to key parts of his confession, key parts that made her look particularly shitty. And she was asked if she'd like to add anything to this confession. And she was like, oh yeah, I definitely do. Now, once she gave this confession and it was typed up, it pretty much did mirror David's pretty closely. There were a couple of changes, but it was pretty much the same story. And what's super crazy to me is she said this very specific thing in her confession that I thought was interesting for one to say, but I'll read it to you. She said, quote, "In a lot of ways, I wish I could have known her better. Everyone talked about how sweet she was, and that's something I will never know. My only comfort was that everything that happens for a reason, and maybe that we didn't know what it was. But we hoped in time that we would find out, because I don't see how all that pain could have a reason." I just find that perspective, in hindsight, after months and months after you've killed somebody, to be kind of insane. So she was charged with murder and held on a $250,000 bail. And David was also eventually, he was arrested, I believe, after her. But anyways, he's also arrested and he's charged with murder. And later, they both also had kidnapping added to their charges. And this was noteworthy because that made it so they were eligible for the death penalty because this was now a capital murder. Now, what's interesting here, and I feel like we've seen this before, is that when it became known that they were going after the death penalty, or they could go after the death penalty for these two kids, Adrianne's family came out and said that that's not what they wanted. They said there had already been enough pain, there had already been enough death, that killing these two more kids wasn't going to bring Adrianne back, so they wanted Diane and David to just get life in prison. I say just life in prison like that's not a serious punishment, but you know what I mean? She didn't want them to get, her parents did not want them to get the death penalty. And Adrianne's mother, Linda, said of this, quote, "It's difficult to lose a child, but to see other children die is pointless." Now, I feel like this arrest had to be so complicated for Adrianne's parents because to first lose your child at all, then to find out that your child was murdered is unimaginable. And then to find out that the person who killed your daughter was two teenagers. That has to be so insane, especially considering like when I say you, I mean her parents, suspected David the whole time. Because I didn't mention this yet, but Linda suspected David the whole time. Ever since she heard her daughter on the phone saying that David from cross country had beeped in, she was like, I think this kid has something to do with it. But when police looked into him, they didn't suspect him at all. And they weren't even looking into him. Like, yes, was he on cross country with Adrianne? Yes. Yes, was he? Yes. But they didn't seem to know each other. Adrianne didn't even have his phone number in her like address book. And as far as everybody knew, the two barely knew each other. It's just wild that he wasn't looked into further. Like, he was spoken to. Police did speak to him. They asked him about his relationship with Adrianne. He said that he knew her, but they weren't exactly friends. They were just on cross country together. So he knew her that way, but they weren't like social. They didn't hang out. They didn't talk to each other on the phone. But despite this, he did still seem to be affected by her death and even cried while being questioned by police. But they questioned him and then just excluded him as a suspect. But now he was confessing. Both of them were, and it wasn't even just their confessions that was going to tie them to this murder because police also found physical evidence that corroborated their confession. Like, for example, in the attic, in the ceiling of David's house, they found a 9mm gun that was wrapped up in a t-shirt and then duct tape in like 3 plastic bags. And they also found the weight that was used to hit Adrianne in the head. And they were both stuffed in the ceiling and in a convenient place to be reached from David's room. Okay. And they also found blood in Diane's car. Because that's the car that was driven the night that Adrianne was killed. And bro, I almost forgot. I can't even believe I almost forgot because this is the most insane part of it all. But Diane, this girl, okay. She was a girl who had a planner, a day planner, and she wrote down everything. Everything, dude. So in her day planner, they found that December 3rd and 4th were circled. And she had written 1:38 a.m. Adrianne. I kid you not, she wrote this in her planner. She had also circled November 4th, the date November 4th, and wrote the word Lubbock, and this was said to be the day that Adrianne and David would have slept together. She also marked down the day, December 1st, where she wrote, David told me, next to it. And it wasn't even just Diane who did the stuff, bro. I didn't even mention it yet, but David also wrote 1:38 in his planner, and that's the time, the approximate time that Adrianne was killed. Which honestly, I'm going to be very real with you. When I read that, I was like, that feels a little bit trophy-ish to me. I might be, looking into too many true crime cases, but you'll have to let me know what you think. Does writing down the time and circling the date that you committed your murder feel trophy-ish to me or reminder-ish to you? You let me know. But in the meantime, let's move on. Now, when these two were arrested, the media had a field day because of who these kids were, because of how good their reputations were, how good they were individually, and how good they were seen as a couple. And I do think who they were played a huge part into why their case was so publicized. I think that was probably the biggest part, and who Adrianne was also. But another reason it was so popular is because their case was coming on the heels of another case that was locally highly publicized. Because the same year, 1995, a girl named Marie Robards went to trial for murdering her father. And this happened just about 20 minutes away in Fort Worth. And she was 16 and also, like these two, was one of the most unsuspecting people. Somebody that you would never think would commit a crime like this. It's a pretty interesting case. I may have to cover it. See you Monday, but let's move on. People were flabbergasted when these two got arrested, not just because of all the things that I've already told you, but just because of how much they were around. They were around a lot when this happened. So they got to see everybody's pain and suffering. They were there at the memorial service. They were there when a tree was planted in Adrianne's honor. And it was just crazy to think that the two people who did this to Adrianne were right there watching them suffer in real time, and that the two people who did this were kids. Kids. The DA literally said of this, quote, "It was two of America's best and brightest, with everything to live for and the world out there ahead of them, just waiting to be conquered. For them to do such a cowardly, dastardly act together, and then continue the rest of their high school year like nothing was wrong, and get into their academies, it just was so out of the ordinary." And because of that, everybody was talking about the case. It started being very popular just locally, but within no time became very well known nationwide. And it was so well known nationwide that before the two even went to trial, when they were just arrested, a movie was made about this crime. Okay, a movie was made about this murder. And the movie about this murder is actually how I learned about this case in the first place. So the movie came out in 1997 when I would have been around 9 years old. So that's when I first learned about this case. Probably too young, but it just is what it is, right? And at the time, the only other true crime case I knew about was JonBenet Ramsey. And that's because tabloids with JonBenet Ramsey's face were in the grocery stores then, are in the grocery stores now, and will probably be in the grocery stores until the end of time. So I knew JonBenet's face, but I didn't know her story. I knew Adrianne's story because I saw the movie about her case, so yeah. The movie is called two different things. It's either called Swearing Allegiance or Love's Deadly Triangle, the Texas Cadet Murder. And one of those two titles definitely rolls up the tongue better than the other, but you'll have to let me know which one you prefer. Also, why do you think they do that? Why do they do that? Why do they change the name of a movie so that you get confused and you don't know what's going on? Like, for example, why is Edge of Tomorrow also called Live, Die, Repeat? Let's stop that. Anyways, I saw this movie very young because the actress that played Diane Zamora in the movie was none other than Holly Marie Combs. Holly Marie Combs, my lord. Holly Marie was none other than Piper Hallowell from Charmed, okay? And in our house, Holly Marie Combs, Alyssa Milano, Rose McGowan, and Shannon Doherty, R.I.P., were queens. And also, Julian McMahon, R.I.P., because he recently passed away as well, Cole Turner, Balthazar. Anyways, I remember this movie so well because I remember thinking that it was not in these exact words, but I remember thinking that it was so fucked up and unfathomable that somebody so young could do something so terrible. And also something so truly stupid, because listen, I know that heartbreak sucks. I know that getting cheated on must suck, but you just can't go around killing people, dude. You will get over it, I promise. I mean, I don't know you, I can't promise, but you'll get over it. No person is worth that. No person is worth taking another person's life for. And on top of those being the reasons that this movie stuck out to me, another reason that the movie stuck out to me and has seared itself into my brain for all of my life is because there's one particular thing that the characters say to each other that is incredibly cringy to me. Now, some reports about this case say that David and Diane actually said this to each other, and that's why it's in the movie. But the reports that I've seen that say that aren't from publications that I trust are being honest. I just saw it in a couple places, but sometimes when a movie is about a case, the details can get a little bit murky. So I don't know for sure if Diane and David said this, but in the movie they did. And what they would say to each other was greenish brown female. I can't talk today. Greenish brown female sheep. Okay, and that was their way of telling each other that they loved each other. And that's because greenish brown was olive, female sheep, you. So all of you, I love you, greenish brown female sheep. Now, I don't know what's worse. That or Love and Joe saying to each other, I wolf you, instead of I love you, in the show You. Leave your comment down below with your vote as to which is the cringier thing to say to your partner that you love them. But moving on. To Diane and David, both confessed, both in jail for murder and kidnapping. And at the time when they were first arrested, they were still totally in love with each other, totally infatuated with each other, were asking immediately when they would be able to see each other. And apparently during one hearing before the main hearing, because there's lots of hearings before the hearing, lots of hearings before the trial. During one of these hearings, a reporter asked David what he would like to say to Diane if he could talk to her. And he just simply said, I love you. Which, where's the greenish brown female sheep now? It seems like that would be the time to do it, and he didn't. They also wrote each other letters constantly, talking about how they loved each other, how they missed each other. David wrote to Diane talking about how she was like ice cream, tasty and bad for him. And Diane wrote about how she wishes she had a time machine so that she could go back in time and fix all this. Because, they had no ordinary love. No ordinary love. Anyways, the two were going to trial and they were going to be tried separately. And Diane's trial was going to be first. And by the time her trial came along, something had definitely broken down internally, and like their unwavering love for each other seemed to waver a little bit, because both of them, when they went to trial, their tactic was going to be saying that they didn't do anything, that the other person committed the murder, and they just tried to cover it up with them after the fact. So let's go through Diane's trial a little bit. Her trial was actually, for the record, able to be aired on TV. Like, the judge made the determination that they could air it on TV. And her trial received national media attention, providing court TV with some of the highest ratings ever in their film coverage of the capital murder trial. And that seemed to be because people were very interested in deciding whether Diane was really the jealous force behind this murder, or if she was just a submissive woman who was battered and abused by her domineering boyfriend, because that's what she and her attorney were going to try to argue. They tried to prove that David was the dominant one in the relationship and Diane was the submissive one, and she would do anything she could to just avoid his wrath. They said that David was very possessive, and the defense said of this quote, "David Graham became her mother, her father, and her lover," which is a weird choice of words in my opinion. But I guess I get the sentiment. They said that David would tell Diane that he earned her and that he owned her and that nobody could ever have her again because she belonged to him. They also tried to imply that he may have sexually assaulted her at some point because she had hurt her hand. I don't remember if I talked about this, but she hurt her hand, I think, driving his car. Oh, yeah, because he stayed with her in the hospital. I did tell you about this. So he apparently, when she was on these painkillers that she got for her hand, she was all groggy. And after a time that they spent together, he told her that the two slept together and she didn't remember it happening. Her defense attorney also said that David had taken a gun and had put it between her legs and then in her mouth during a sexual act in a way to sort of control and manipulate her and show her that he was the person who was control and she had to do whatever he said. To further prove this dynamic between the two of them, they submitted some letters that David had written to Diane while they were separate at their two academies. In these letters, they would call each other Tiger, David, and Kitten, Diane, which was another way that the defense was saying that he was clearly the dominant one because tigers are more dominant than kittens. Okay. And in one of these letters that he wrote to Diane, months after Adrianne was killed, he gave her a list of like rules and regulations that she needed to follow when he wasn't around. Here was that letter. "Diane, please respond to this letter soon. I'm crazy about you. You know that? You are all mine, so don't let anyone else near you. You are supposed to follow my rules as I follow yours. Here are mine. Please send yours." This is in all caps, by the way. 1, don't let any guys come into your room. If you are already in there, go elsewhere. 2, don't talk to any former Marines unless business related. 3, if anyone, male or female, hugs, kisses, or touches you, deck 'em. And 4, write at least 30 pages per week. Love your night, Sir David. I don't like men enough to deal with that. So basically what the defense was saying is that Diane had given a false confession when she told the police that she participated in the murder of Adrianne. She said she didn't help with the murder at all. She didn't even know that the murder was going to be committed that night when she and David drove over to pick up Adrianne. She thought that the two were just going to talk to her. This is what she says. She said that David was the only one who physically assaulted Adrianne, that she did not actually hit Adrianne in the head with that weight, that instead what actually happened is that David hit her in the head with the butt of the gun. She says that he did this when he chased her out of the car. And by them saying this, they're saying that David's the one that hit her in the head and David is the one that shot her. So that would mean that only David took part in the murder, is what they're trying to say. Her defense attorney also pointed out that her hand, Diane's hand, was too injured at the time that Adrianne was killed to actually commit the acts that she confessed to committing. So, to explain any evidence that was found at the scene that would link Diane in any way to the murder, Diane got on the stand and she gave her own version of events. And this is a new version of events. And you tell me if this sounds like something that makes sense to you. Okay. She says that they're in the car. She thinks they're just going to talk. She says that David then starts attacking Adrianne. And Adrianne gets out of the car and starts running. So David gets out of the car. He pursues her. He pistol whips her. Shoots her once. Okay. Then picks her up off the ground, brings her back to the car, leans her in the car, like through a window, which would explain how the blood got in her car, because remember, there's blood in her car. But she's saying there was no struggle in the car. Leans her in the window to show Diane what he did, and takes her back to the fence, then shoots her again. To me, I don't want to influence your opinion, but to me, that sounds dumb. But that's what she says happened. So she says that she was not guilty of the murder. She was just guilty of covering up the crime after the fact. She says she doesn't tell David to kill Adrian and didn't even know he was going to do it until the deed was done. While on the stand, Diane told the court that David blamed Adrian 100% for the affair that they had, for the encounter that they had. He said that Adrian had been following him around school and wouldn't leave him alone. He also, according to her, tried to blame Diane for the crime happening because, get this, the night that he cheated, Diane was out at the movies with her parents, so he couldn't get a hold of her. So naturally, he had to drive Adrian home since his girlfriend wasn't available to him, and he naturally had to cheat. And apparently after cheating, this is crazy to me, apparently after cheating with, and I'm saying this and there's a reason, we'll get to it, after whatever happened, he drives to his girlfriend's house when she gets home from the movies. And he comes into her house and she says that she can tell that something is off. He was standing there with a little red stuffed dog. I don't know if it was Clifford, it might very well have been, but a little stuffed dog, and is looking guilty. And she could tell something was wrong, but didn't know what it was until a month later when he came to her and admitted what he did. Now, during Diane's case, the prosecution said they did not believe this at all. They believed that it was actually David, not Diane, who was just covering up after the fact and not involved in the murder. They said they only believed that David confessed to being the trigger man because he was obsessed and worshipped Diane. And so he admitted to being involved in a murder when really he's the one who just helped cover it up after the fact, which also, that seems a little dumb to me, right? Usually I'm like, both sides sound a little dumb because I think it's obvious that they are both involved. Personally, that's just my opinion. Because let's think about it for a second. David is the one who called Adrian to lure her out of the house, which her mother knows. So many people testified against Diane at her trial, okay? Even her best friend testified against her, which had to suck. Because as a girl, as a goyle, I was once a girl. That sucks. That really sucks. But her friend, I forget her name, she went on the stand and she told the court that she knew firsthand that Diane and David had planned the murder of Adrian together because Diane was upset that David and Adrian had sex with each other. And she did also help the defense a little bit by showing David's nature, his controlling, dominating nature, because she told the court that there was a time, was this after or before Adrian was killed? It was 6 months after the murder, I remember. Okay, so 6 months after the murder, they were out camping. It looks like this girl had her own tent, and then David and Diane had a tent. And David and Diane got in a fight. And Diane left, and she was super upset. She was crying, and she went to her friend's tent to do girls things, girls doing girls things. And while they're in there, just being girls, David came and took a knife that was 14 or 15 inches long and slashed the tent that they were in out of anger, which is unhinged. It is unhinged. One of David's friends named John also took the stand. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but John was David's friend. I did just mention that. But the night of the murder, after the two committed the murder, Diane and David, they went over to John's house, okay? And David went up, knocked on John's bedroom window to be allowed access to his room, which apparently was not a weird thing for them to do. John's parents even knew that David would do this instead of coming to the front door, and they were fine with it. But that's neither here nor there. So he comes to the window, a knock, knock, knock. John opens it and lets David and Diane in. And according to John, David said to him, quote, "You're my best friend. We were never here, and you don't want to know." Now, in her confession, because Diane and David both confessed to going to John's house. Well, in Diane's version of this confession, she said that when they got there, she started cleaning David's clothes for him. And that during this time, they wouldn't really look at each other because they were afraid of the situation, or even afraid of each other a little bit because they now knew what the other was capable of. And after some time of trying to keep it together, she just cried and broke down and begged God to forgive them for what they did. And this is something David corroborated too. He said that the two laid on the bedroom floor and cried and fell asleep together. And John backed this up, saying that Diane was very upset and crying a lot, and David was doing everything in his power to calm her down. And for the record, Diane said in her confession that after leaving John's house the following day, they went back to Diane's, where David vomited and passed out, and she cleaned out her car. Diane's old roommate, Jennifer, also took the stand, and this is one of the two girls that Diane confessed to while she was at the Naval Academy. And Jennifer got up on the stand and told the court that Diane said to her that everyone knew Adrian was a slut, and she deserved what happened to her. She deserved to die. She said specifically of this, And I quote, "She told me that she and her boyfriend David had killed a girl while they were in high school. She said the girl had slept with David, and she said in order to make up for it, he had to kill her." But when the defense questioned her, like when they cross-examined her, they got her to admit that in the story Diane told, David was the one that was the trigger man. Which brings us back to the defense, right? And the defense were basically saying that Diane's guilty conscience got the best of her, and that's why she admitted to her roommates what she and David had done. She said that prior to being questioned by the police, she and David had sat down together and had come up with a story of what they were going to say happened, where she took part of the blame for what happened, even though she didn't do it. She said that she loved David and she feared David and she wanted to do anything she could to help David, to make sure that his military career was going to be intact because he had worked so hard for it and she loved him so much. Now, while on the stand, she cried a lot. She struggled a lot to get her sentences out while she was talking to the defense, at least. Like, once she was on cross-examination with the prosecution, her energy definitely changed a little bit. While being questioned by the prosecution, she sat up on that stand and she said that everybody who testified against her were either misinterpreting things she said, like her roommates, or flat out lying. Her best friend. She's saying her best friend was flat out lying. And she seemed very, arrogant and dismissive and cocky, and said that she did not kill Adrianne no matter what they said. She wasn't the one that was lying. But people were not convinced. They thought that on the stand she seemed too composed and controlled to be somebody who was dominated by David. And they didn't believe that her emotions were sincere either. They said that she was crying crocodile tears. So after giving closing arguments, the prosecution ended with saying, and I quote, "Lives matter, truth matters. Adrianne Jones matters. The only verdict you can return with the evidence that you have is guilty of capital murder." So the jury was sent to deliberate, and after just 6 hours, they returned with their decision. And they had found Diane Zamora guilty of capital murder, with one juror saying that no matter how they looked at this situation, Adrianne Jones would still be alive if it wasn't for Diane. So Diane was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 40 years when she's nearly 60. And this was in February of 1998. So she's coming up on 30 years now. And the DA quoted Diane herself when Diane was talking about Adrianne, but now the DA was switching it and being very dramatic and putting it on Diane, saying that she deserved it. She deserved everything she got. And as for Adrianne's family, they knew that this was just half the work, with her mother, Linda, saying, quote, "We can only hope that if David Graham respects his military code of honor, he will step forward and accept responsibility." But he did not. Like Diane, he was also pleading not guilty. When David went to trial, his trial was actually moved to another area because they were trying to avoid the media circus that took place at Diane's trial. And you know what? I actually don't know if his was recorded. I know that hers was. When I looked online, I saw a lot of footage and like images from hers, but not really from his. So I didn't confirm that, but I don't know if his was also televised, but hers was. Now, David's defense was basically the exact same as Diane's. After her trial, and David saw how she was handling her trial, he broke off their engagement. They were still engaged prior to that, and he broke it off because he was super upset. He was upset that her defense would have been blaming him for the entire thing. And so now he broke off the engagement, and he was going to take a page from her playbook and blame her for the entire thing. David said when it came to his defense, he wasn't going to let his crazy, infatuated, obsessive relationship with Diane get in the way of him telling the truth. Which to me sounds kind of like, she threw me under the bus, so guess what, bitch? I'm now going to back that bus right over her. The wheels on the bus go round and round and round and round. David said that Diane did everything, not him, and he was just the one covering it up after the fact. He said that his confession was coerced. A confession, by the way, that I didn't mention this, but I think it just says something about his character, and I don't know what it says. But it's a confession that he actually typed up himself, because while he was there giving his confession, he felt that the police's typist was too slow, so he took over and typed it himself. He said that he had been awake and questioned for 30 hours, and he gave this confession under the spell of exhaustion, basically. He said that the detective started telling him that it didn't matter if he denied it, that he and his love were going to get the death penalty regardless, so if he wanted them to help him out at all, he better sit down and tell them what they wanted to hear. He said that one of the cops told him, just write down a story. It doesn't matter if it's true, just write something down and we will help you. And he said specifically of this quote, "It was all so surreal. I hadn't really internalized it yet. And I guess after being awake for so many hours, what I said to the police, I guess I didn't see how any of that could affect my life." He didn't see how admitting to committing murder could affect his life. Now, I've never been interrogated for 30 hours, but that sounds crazy to me. Now, he has something different in his story than Diane did. He said he wasn't even there. He said he met up with Diane after she committed the murder and she confessed what she had done, but he wasn't even there when it happened. He just helped her clean it up after the fact. The defense said there was no physical evidence that tied David to the scene and that the only physical evidence they had was the blood in Diane's car, which tied her to the scene. But you may be asking, what about the items in David's attic? Well, he's saying that he just took those items to hide for Diane. He even said that Diane had an attachment to these items and wouldn't let him get rid of them, which sounds super legit for sure. Now, David and Diane's trials were very similar in a lot of ways, but there was one main difference between David's and Diane's that was humongous and notable. There was a piece of big bombshell testimony, okay? It was very much a needle drop moment, and it made everybody look at the case through a different lens and ask the question, like, what really happened here? So the testimony comes from this girl named Wendy, and you remember how I said that David told Diane that the night that he slept with Adrianne was after they had gone to regionals together, and then after regionals, they drove home together and went to that parking lot at the elementary school and slept together. Well, Wendy got on the stand and said that that wasn't possible because the night after regionals, she drove Adrianne home. So with this testimony, the whole motive for the murder blew up because if he didn't drive her home from regionals and he didn't have the opportunity to sleep with her, and if he didn't sleep with her, why did he tell Diane that he did sleep with her? And then why did they kill her? It led a lot of people to believe that they didn't sleep together, especially because her friend said, Adrianne wasn't the type of girl to casually hook up with guys. She flirted, yes, but she had a boyfriend, and she knew that David had a girlfriend, so she never would have done that. Now, I gotta say, I've said this before, and I will say it again. I'm not fully convinced they didn't sleep together at some point because I can't think of an excuse, a reason that Adrianne would have left her house barefoot at 1 a.m. to go with somebody that she hadn't been intimate with in the past, somebody that she had that kind of trust in. But then again, I didn't know her, so that's just my gut reaction from the information I know. I also don't think that when she left her house that night, she was intending to hook up with David again, them saying that she leaned her seat back like she was gonna do something. I don't think that's true either, because I don't want to be crude here, but she was on her lady days at the time that she was killed, and she had something in effect to aid in her lady days situation. So I just don't think that she would have been down with that particular sickness to hook up with some guy that wasn't even her boyfriend, considering the condition she was in. But if you have theories, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. The prosecution's theory as to why David said that he slept with Adrianne when he didn't is that he wanted another way to manipulate and control Diane. Either way, it hardly matters because they killed her just the same. It's just that, if he and Adrianne never even hooked up, then this murder was absolutely for nothing. And, even if they did hook up, it was still a murder for nothing. But if they didn't even hook up, it's why? What was all of this for? What was the point? What was your goal in telling Diane this happened if it didn't? I don't understand that. That's a question that was never answered also because he didn't even testify. And you know what? It's not even just that he didn't testify. He had nobody there to testify on his behalf, which I thought was crazy. There were no witnesses for him. Well, there was one. There was one witness for him, and that was actually Diane herself. She got on the stand at his trial, but instead of answering any questions, she pled the fifth. She wasn't going to help him, but she wasn't going to hurt him either. So with that, jury was sent to deliberate. After 8 hours, the jury came back with their decision. They had found David Graham guilty of Adrianne Jones's capital murder, and he was given 40 years in prison. Now, he was very surprised to hear that verdict was that was the decision it was going to be. But the worst part of all for him was just hearing how his family started to cry when they heard the news. Now, they did both appeal their convictions. They've done it multiple times, but they've been rejected every single time. So right now, their first eligibility for parole will be in 2036. So they're still in prison, and while in prison, they have changed their stories multiple times. Diane gave an interview to Dateline where she doubled down on David being responsible. She said that she felt if she didn't take the blame for David, he would have killed her too. She said that she believes David told her that he slept with Adrianne to upset her because she was trying to break up with him. And to this day, she says she was there. She admits to even pulling Adrianne's hair, but says that she did not murder Adrianne. David did. She also agreed to and gave a polygraph exam during this interview, but the results were mixed and inconclusive. So as for David, after his conviction, he did say that he made the whole thing up, that he never slept with Adrianne, that was all a lie, that they were casual friends, and he had given her a ride home on occasions after their practices, but there was nothing intimate between the two of them. But then later he gives another interview where he says he did kill Adrianne and he did it to prove his ultimate devotion for Diane, but said that he regretted killing Adrianne. Either way, he says he regrets doing what he did, and if he had the opportunity to do the whole thing over, well, first, he just wouldn't have killed her. But if he couldn't go back and change that, what he would change is he would have gone back and pled guilty right off the bat and saved everybody the heartbreak of going through with a trial. David has said that he's adjusted to prison better than he thought, better than most people would think. He said that prison is a lot like the military, that, there's always somebody yelling at you and somebody in control of you. But he said when you're in the military, you get more respect. He said the guards in prison basically don't think you're worth very much, but he's made it his mission to make sure to make something out of his life while in prison. He even got a degree in criminology. David says he's still obsessed with the idea of being a pilot and hopes that one day he will be released from prison and be able to go on and fly a plane again, and said that going to prison has had one silver lining. He was able to get away from Diane. And he said that losing his dreams and everything he worked for was worth it because he was able to get away from her. And then ran right into the arms of somebody else. They actually both did. So he married a woman who I believe was outside of prison, and she actually married another inmate who was in another prison, somebody that she had never even met before because they were both prisoners, but they quickly got divorced because he was going to get out way sooner than her. She has like another 30 years, and at the time that they got married, he had just one more year. So I guess, being in the free world gave him a lot more options than he had before. So, I don't know about David. I don't know if he's still married. I know that Diane, has since been divorced. But what's crazy? I thought this was insane. And this is just an aside, but it's very interesting. So if you want to hear about it, let me just tell you, it's going to be very quick. But so Diane and this prisoner guy want to get married, right? But they're both prisoners. They're both in prison. So they can't marry each other officially. So they have to get married in what's called a double proxy wedding. Okay. So basically, if there's like a proxy wedding, it's like you are getting married with somebody standing in for your spouse. Okay, so that's the proxy wedding. Somebody standing in for your spouse, and then your spouse is having a ceremony wherever they are, and somebody's standing in for you there. So that's happening at the same time. That's a single proxy wedding. A double proxy wedding is that you are at your prison, and you have somebody standing in for your spouse. They are at their prison, have somebody standing in it for their spouse. And then in a whole separate ceremony, there's two proxies standing in for the two of you. And that's how a double proxy wedding is conducted. And I just thought that was a bit insane. There's been a lot about this case that I feel is a bit insane. Oh, and speaking of insane, bro, I've got one more bit of information for you. Guess who Diane's friends with in prison? Guess. You might know. If you don't know, now you know. This is so random, but I had to tell you, it's freaking Yolanda, bro. The chick who killed Selena, Yolanda Salvador. The two became friends in prison, and Diane even tried to claim that she and Yolanda were being targeted by other inmates because of the high-profile nature of their cases. She wanted both of them to go to protective custody, which, if they went there, they would also get rooms that had better air conditioning and bigger TVs. I don't know if that's related, but that's just the way it is. She even tried to claim that having her in Gen Pop was cruel and unusual punishment. But maybe that's just the consequences of your actions when you go and murder somebody's kid. I don't know. You took someone's kid, bro. You took someone's sister. Her brother has said that after losing his sister, it's like a piece of his heart was ripped out that will never be replaced. They loved her. They looked forward to watching her grow and watching her live her life and seeing all the things that she could have done with all the potential she had, but it was stolen from her. All they have left of their daughter, of their sister, of their loved one is memories. Memories of her playing soccer, memories of, her mother says she has memories of her hair flipping in the wind. And she said she'll remember her daughter with pride and joy for the rest of her life because she, quote, soars free in the atmosphere above me, coming to me in dreams, coming to me in vision, and coming to me in warmth. I'm grateful that I can have that memory. And all she has left are these memories because of this modern day Romeo and Juliet, who instead of killing themselves, killed someone else. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Adrianne Jones. I hope that you found it to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering her with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Who do you believe was the instigator, the driving factor in the murder of Adrianne Jones? Do you think it was David, or do you think it was Diane? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I am curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you may know, whenever you leave me a case suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. Now, if you don't already know, now you know that what you are seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears is also a podcast now. It's True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN anywhere that you get podcasts, anywhere you partake in podcasts. If you want to go, listen. download, like it. If you like it, I would appreciate it because I am trying to get out into the algorithm there and I'm kind of new. But if you're not interested in that, I also understand. That's fine. I just want to thank you for being here. Now, with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. In the meantime, take care of yourself.